So let's look at some fundamental points about lists. So in Python, we always use square brackets to denote lists. That's actually, if you've seen arrays in other languages, it's the same thing. You use a square bracket to denote a list of things or an array of things. You can store numbers in lists, like 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, or you can store booleans, true, false, or you can store strings, and you can store other data types. So there you can see 3 different examples of storing different types of data. You can even mix different data types in the same list. So you could have a number and then a boolean and then a string and another number and so on, but it's not common that you do that. Most programming languages wouldn't let you do that, and it's not particularly recommended, because then you've got to know what you're expecting when you're dealing with a list. Okay, there's a page on W3 Schools about lists in Python that will give you a bit more information. So, how do we get access to lists? How do we access the value of a listed item? You can, well, one way is to use the list index or list indices. So that's the plural of that of index. So if fruits was a list, then fruits brackets 2, square brackets 2 is the item of the list with index 2. Okay, but you've got to remember that listings. Well, you may not know this, but I'm telling you now, list indices are numbered from 0. They start from 0, just like our range function that we saw last week starts from 0. So fruits 2 is actually the third item of the list fruits. Okay, fruits 0 is the first item, fruits 1 is the second, and fruits 2 is the third. That's a little confusing until you get used to it, but it's done for very good reasons, and almost all programming languages do exactly the same thing, where they start counting at 0. Yeah, it's not designed to be confusing, and you get used to it quickly. It's just there's reasons why it's done, and it also handily corresponds with the range function, which gives us values starting at 0. So it's very common to use a range function to work through a list. Okay, how do you create a list or initialize a list? Well, there's different ways of doing it. This is not the commonest way, but this would tell us that we were going to have a list of 4 values and set them all to being nothing. So it's just, we're saying fruits is the list, and we're saying we've got 4 times the value of nothing or none, and then you can fill in the values. Okay, so this would be one way of doing it. You say I want 4 of these things, and I'm going to set 0, 1, 2, 3, and 0, 1, 2, and 3 to these particular values. So we've got 4 values in our list. I tell Python that I want 4 at the beginning, and then I tell Python exactly which one each is. And that's one way of doing it. And if we look at the first example, that's how it's done. And you can print out, you can either print out individual items. So here we're printing out, at the top of this bit of code, we're printing out fruit 0, fruits 1. So we print out one thing after the other. Or, so that prints out each item one at a time. Or you can use a loop that runs through the values. And this is an even more common way of doing it. So for I in the range 4, we can print the value of each fruits item in the list. So I takes the value 0, 1, 2, and 3. So as this loop runs, I print out fruit 0, fruits 1, fruits 2, fruits 3, and that will give exactly the same output as this first bit of code, which is much longer and not so handy to write. You've got to make sure you get all the numbers right. This just loops over the values, or you can just print the list directly. So print fruits. So that's sometimes quite a useful way of getting a quick evaluation what's in the list, but it's not always advisable, especially if your list contains millions of values. Okay, so that's what the output for those 3 ways of printing the list look like. You can see the first one prints them out one at a time. The second one gets the same output, but in a much neater way, because it just loops over the values. And then the third one prints out the list as a thing, and it's formatted like this. Right, let's stop that video here, and then we'll get on with the next item.